This week, we're very happy to welcome on as our special guest and a new friend of the show, a guy who covers the Rangers and the Islanders for a very long time for The Athletic. He's also the host of the show, The Garden Faithful. We're super pumped that he's here. He's back from Pittsburgh in New York. Welcome to the show, the legendary Arthur Staple. What's going on?
How you doing, guys? Good to be here.
What's up?
So I do want to ask you right off the bat a time capsule question, because like I told you before the recording, we're dropping this Thursday morning after Game 5. So I'm asking you a two-parter. So I want you to answer in both ways. One, what is the strategy going into Game 6, assuming the Rangers won Game 5? And two, is the season a complete failure with a loss in Game 5?
I'll start with the second one. Complete failure is pretty tough. This is a 110-point season. The expectations were definitely not for a season like they had. So, you can separate out, if we're talking post-mortem right now and things are over, it's a horrible way to end what had been a really great season, even if it was a total surprise. And obviously Igor Shesterkin has established himself as one of the best goalies in the league this year. He's going to get the award for sure for the best goalie in the league. He's going to be on some Hart Trophy ballots, including my own. I think the emergence of some of their younger guys like Keandre Miller has taken some big steps forward. And I think even in the midst of what hasn't been a terrific playoff series, obviously you've seen flashes from Alexis Lafreniere and Capo Caco that these are, now you're starting to see why these guys were top 2 picks. They've really kind of stepped up their game, it seems, at the right time. It's unfortunate that a lot of their teammates have not done the same, but I think some of the advancement of the young guys and some of the big numbers that some of their established guys put up during the regular season, Chris Kreider, Artemi Panarin, Adam Fox, these are all positive developments. You can't take that. One bad playoff series can't take that away. So I feel like it's not a complete failure. It's a bit of a head scratcher, going into a Game 6. They obviously need to be a lot better in Pittsburgh. It's been a long time since I've seen a team look that rattled, being in another team's building in the playoffs. It really is the word to use to describe it. They all looked pretty shell-shocked in the first period in Game 3, even though they rallied back, and the rest of that game was pretty evenly played. And then in Game 4, in the second period, it was quite shocking. And I'm sure it was quite shocking to Chris Drury and to Gerard Gallant and to a lot of the guys in the room that the team that had shown so much ability to rally back, winning so many games coming from behind, or just kind of keeping that same even keel for such an inexperienced group for the most part, that they just seem to lose all their patience and all their composure, and not really do any of the things that had made them so successul during the year. So if they're going back there, it's obviously the main focus is be smart, play the way that they know that they can play. They'll have won a Game 5, so they'll be feeling a little bit better about themselves, and reminding themselves that the Penguins do have Sidney Crosby, who's still at 34 playing like one of the best players in the world. But beyond that, do they have anybody that scares them? No, and certainly not their third string goalie. So I feel like if they're still alive in the series, they can remind themselves that there was a reason that a lot of people were picking them to win this series in the first place.
I'm not gonna lie, I was really nervous how that question would go, but that was perfectly executed. But on top of that, though, so let's say I don't want to be negative. Cody and I are both super positive. We both think it's going to Game 7. But if they do lose the series, which still we don't know, and this is the last time I'm going to harp on it, is the
before
deadline,
I harp on it.
Yeah, exactly. Are the deadline moves diminished though? Because they could have made better moves toward their future. Had if you went back and said, "Hey, you're going to lose in the first round," obviously the moves would be a lot different.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think the Tyler Mott injury is real unfortunate, and I think this has not been a series where the Rangers are losing things on the margins. They're not losing because they picked the wrong guy for the fourth line or things like that. These are major core reasons why they fell behind so badly in this series. So that, maybe that's a decision you can make. And I think, as you mentioned about my podcast, which recorded today, we were talking about, the one thing you can look back at the deadline and say that I think everyone was saying at the time was you need a lefty defenseman. Yeah. They needed a guy like a Calvin DeHaan, Andy Green, anybody who plays the left side who's got some experience and got some playoff experience. Sherrod was cost the Panthers a lot. I don't know if that was the big play you wanted to make, but Justin Braun was a nice addition and clearly an important one because he's had to step in with Ryan Lindgren out and done an okay job, which is what you'd expect from a guy like him. But I think the real failure was not identifying really early on in the season that Patrick Nemeth is not a good fit on this top six.
Here comes Cody.
And, well, I'm sure we'll get to that. That's a hot topic.
We will get to that. We will get to that.
I think everybody who on this podcast, on my podcast, any Ranger podcast, any Ranger fan could see that this guy was not really up to the task, and I think he's really been, on a team that's had some pretty glaring errors in this series. His mistakes have really stood out a lot. I think game 3 when it was tied, he made a bad play going to play the puck in the corner, and then he made an even worse play not tying up Danton Heinen's stick. In fact, he deflected his stick so that Georgiev got fooled on the shot quite clearly, and it was change up that beat him. And then the penalty he took, when the Rangers were up 1-0 in game 4, it's inexcusable. You can't do stuff like that. And there's no way for the Rangers to take him out of the lineup, it seems, because they haven't let Libor Hayek play. They haven't let Zach Jones play to the point where they trust either of those guys. And going back to the deadline, your original question, they didn't go get a lefty defenseman, a veteran guy to supplant Nemeth. The other moves, Vetrano and Kopp, I don't know how you can second guess them. Those guys were really good down the stretch. They both had a couple of decent moments. I think Kopp more so than Vetrano in this playoff series. And really the big costly one was Kopp. And I think that will be worth it because there really is a decision to be made now for Chris Jury, whether the series, whether the season is over or not. Do we sign this guy, or do we sign Ryan Strome, or do we go for what's behind door number 3? And to my mind, if you're going with, what which is usually the safest route, I'm betting on Andrew Kopp as your, whether he's the number 2 center or a wing, if there's someone that they can find a slot in there, or if he's another versatile guy who plays the way that this team needs to play. And he's not doing it enough, I think, this series, but that's on everybody. But I think this is a guy who, if he plays the full year on a line with Artemi Panarin, could be a 30-goal, 60-point guy. He's a guy who kills penalties. He can play on the power play if you need to. I think this guy is just scratching the surface of what kind of player he can be. And, he's captain material, not that he's going to step in front of anybody that's been here a long time, but I think he's the sort of, high character guy, steps up, answers questions when you ask him. He doesn't shy away from that sort of stuff. I think that, Ryan Strome has a lot of the similar characteristics, but I think if you're just looking on the ice, chemistry, importance to a core that needs to be developed a little bit more, I think you go with Andrew Kopp. So obviously that trade to me is going to be worth it 10 times out of 10.
Yeah. And you mentioned some really good points there. Johnny knows where I stand on that. I'm right with you with Kopp. I think he's
I'm a strong guy.
I think
it's still a toss up. I think, I think Ryan Strome brings a lot to the table. I think
I agree. And you know what? I just wanted to walk it back a little because you made some really good points, and back to expectations. I think everybody can agree coming into this season, our expectation was just to make playoffs. And then, clearly our team overperformed everybody's and surpassed everybody's expectations. So to change, the expectation from making playoffs to winning a round, I think was everybody's kind of mentality, but I don't think it's necessarily fair on the team. Obviously I would love to win the series and come back and win, but so I agree with you on that point, but the things that have really stood out to me, especially in games 3 and 4, I think we just need to play harder, better hockey, be faster off the draw. I feel like we're getting beat on face-offs and then, racing towards the puck and really just be stronger on the forecheck.
I feel
like I just quoted Kanye West, better, faster, stronger, but anyways,
I was wondering where you got that from.
But anyways, I thought they completely overmatched Pittsburgh when they're really heavy on the forecheck, like they were in game 2, as well as in that first period in game 1. So if they can figure out a way to kind of just get back to their roots there, and I'm sure GG had a long talking to them, I think they can, really just have that one game at a time mentality and then kind of take it from there. But you did mention Nemeth. So you know, I have to bring up Nemeth.
Trigger word.
Yeah, trigger word. So you said it. I mean, he's quite frankly had a pretty brutal series. So I guess my question to you is, at this point in time, do you think a buyout this summer is a very, very realistic possibility, knowing, you know, the team's cap restricted and so on?
You know, I think they could try. I don't know, you know, I don't know if that's the first route you try. You know, there's still a couple teams out there that'll take on a bad contract for a year or two if you throw in a second round pick, say. So that may have to be the way that they go and kind of bite the bullet on that. But you know, they're headed in this direction where they're not going to make the conference finals, and that second round pick in the Andrew Kopp deal doesn't become a first, and you obviously don't have one of those second round picks. So you know, it's going to be a difficult offseason for Chris Drury just because of the cap constraints. I don't think you can get, like you said, you know, the expectations were a little different when the season started as to when they were when you finished. And certainly in the matchup with Pittsburgh, a team that they played very well during the regular season, a team that we just elaborated on, is not really, outside of 87, doesn't really scare you a whole lot, certainly not with their third string goalie in. I think the thing that this series has highlighted that maybe something is a concern going forward is, you know, in the Eastern Conference, Carolina, Tampa, Pittsburgh, you know, the Islanders drop out now because we don't know who their coach is going to be, but these are teams with high level coaches. You know, Mike Sullivan to me is, it's astonishing this guy hasn't won a Jack Adams with the roster that he has there that they keep putting out. And now that, you know, look, now they're playing well. Rod Brindamore has Carolina playing at a high pace, and that's a team that gave the Rangers a lot of trouble in their matchups this season. Tampa is, you know, John Cooper's, you know, been doing this a long time. You know, Gallant's strength is not X's and O's and systems, and I think you're seeing that especially in Game 4. You know, set plays off of faceoffs. The Rangers are not. I mean, you can lose a draw and still not lose your positioning. And the Rangers are not good, have not been good on faceoffs for a long time, and clearly it hasn't hurt them, being the second best defensive team in the league in the regular season. And in that game, particularly, they looked like amateurs. You know, they looked like they had no idea what was coming. You know, Pittsburgh had a million set plays to get them moving in different directions, and it all seemed to work for Pittsburgh. So that to me is a little bit of a concern going forward, that the structure that the Rangers had put in and built up all season long just, you know, evaporated under a little bit of pushback in a tough series. So, you know, I think, and that's something that falls on Gallant and Mike Kelly and Gord Murphy, where, you know, if they accentuate a lot of the mental side over the detail systems, X's and O's, you're still in the Eastern Conference. You're going to have to get through a gauntlet of teams that are very detailed and very good at X's and O's. So, you know, that's something to put in the back of your mind to think about when the Rangers come back next season. If they can duplicate what they did this season, you still could be a Game 6. Still could be a Game 6, and you know, by the looks of things, we don't know what's happened, you know, between now and we're recording and when it comes out. But if it's Carolina next round, you know, and the Rangers can get there, tough task. That's a tough one, especially how deep the Rangers are going to have to dig to win 3 straight against Pittsburgh, how good Penguins are feeling about themselves. So just overall, the point is, this is a conference where, you know, there's a razor thin margin between some of these teams, and you may need that coach who's incredibly detailed and a team that's receptive to those details. And I think if there's one long-term takeaway from this playoff series, if it ends badly for the Rangers, is that the details need to be a lot better for this team and drilled in a lot harder starting next training camp.
Right. So, you know, speaking of next season and some of our rentals that we had talked about earlier, I mean, it's pretty obvious we're going to lose a few of our rentals this offseason. As of course, this season seemed like an all-out push to try and make a deep run at least. Do you think there's any scenario where next year's team can end up better than this year's team, even without a few of our big, you know, contributors coming back?
Yeah, I think so. You know, I think if they, let's say, you know, it's hard to game it out, but if it's Kopp that they bring back and you lose Strome and you lose Vetrano and you lose Mott probably, Because those Vetrano and Mott are probably guys that are due for raises, and there's just not enough room clearly.
Buy
So
out Nemeth.
I don't even know if that creates enough room for you, but if everybody else is back, yeah, I think so, because you still have a lot of room to grow for some of these young guys. You know, I think that top four is going to be a little bit reimagined next season. You know, are you going to see Miller and Trouba be the true top pair as they have been for a little while in the regular season and into this playoff series? You know, Ryan Lindgren's injury obviously changes the calculus, but you know, are you going to end up with a Norris Trophy winning guy who's still 25 years old being your second pair defense guy in Adam Fox? And that's an incredible luxury. And obviously Braden Schneider is going to, you know, has this pretty much this whole year under his belt. He's a guy that every time I'm in a building with scouts or whoever, people that I know around the league, you know, they talk about Keandre Miller, but they all talk about Braden Schneider and how much they love his game. And this is a guy who, you know, is going to create some interesting decisions for them down the road, you know, within a couple of years when his entry level contract is up. Obviously Fox is locked up, Trouba's locked up, so Schneider's going to stay on that third pair. But I think next season, if you see some minutes that are distributed a little bit more evenly, if that includes a Nemeth buyout or at least making him the number 7 guy, and you bring in someone, or maybe even you see Ryan Lindgren get moved if he's, you know, and they bring in somebody who's a little bit more durable, a little bit more veteran guy on the left side. You know, I think
see Johnny eye rolling.
I mean, Lindgren's a warrior, and it sucks that he's been hurt. And
I'm
clearly
shocked.
it's a bad injury, because this is a guy who plays through a ton of stuff. So, you know, I just think that this D core with Miller, Trouba, Fox, Schneider, you know, when you've got that right side completely locked down. You know, I covered the Islanders for a long time, and they're widely considered to be one of the best defensive teams in the league. And they have Pelech and Pulock and Noah Dobson and Scott Mayfield, guys that people are envious of, and some of their contracts are really good. The Rangers can have that. The Rangers can have that same sort of decor that's together for a long time. They're not going to play defense the same way the Islanders do, but I think just having that reliability and the guys with this kind of experience, not just the playoffs, you don't need a deep run. You just need to be there once and go through it and say, we did it. We know what it's like. We know what we have to do better.
Build a winner's mentality. Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously they're set in goal. You know, they need to get a backup for next season, but there'll be lots of those guys available. And Shesterkin, I think, is not the kind of guy who's just going to sit on his laurels after winning a Vezina. He's gonna come back and be determined to be as good as he was this past year, and maybe he can be that guy that can be a 930 save percentage guy every year, and that puts you at a huge advantage when you've got those cornerstone pieces. You can play around a little bit with the forwards, and like we were saying off the top, Lafreniere and Kakko, if you can plug those guys in to those top 6 roles that they played at times during the season, you've got your top 6 set, and then you've got Barclay Goodrow in your bottom 6. And a few other, you know, whether Kevin Rooney comes back or not, you can play around with that bottom 6 and find whether it's some younger guys that coming up through the system. You know, the Maple Leafs are not a team you want to emulate in any way when it comes to playoff time, obviously, but the roster building part for the Leafs, where they find European free agents or, you know, guys like Colin Blackwell that they traded for at the deadline is filling a fort, you know. If you're set down the middle in your top 6 with the talent the Rangers have, defense especially with 4 or 5 guys in goal, they can be better. And I think more importantly, they'll know that you know, I think which teams do need to learn, whether it was Tampa or the Islander teams that I covered, the regular season is important. You obviously have to get there, and it's not easy to get in that top 8. And if you're out of it, it's even harder to get back in, especially if you start the season slow. But the priority is really to be healthy and focused, mentally prepared for what comes this time of year. And that's maybe the lesson that they'll take away the most from this playoff run, however long it goes.
So I'm very curious into how close you pay attention to Rangers Twitter.
I was steeped in Isles Twitter for a long time. And that was a damaging experience. So I think I've pulled the reins in on Twitter a little bit in terms of, you know, there's certainly guys that I follow that are fans that I try to get a sense of what people are talking about, but I'm not fully fully immersed in it yet. So
have you seen some of these ridiculous comments though about listen, I obviously Igor hasn't been at the top of this game, but the fact that there are people like blaming Igor when the Rangers basically ranked 16th in the playoffs in like every defensive category. And then, I know you touched on it on your podcast today about just the X's and O's with Gallant versus Sullivan. And sure, Gallant maybe hasn't made the best, but Cody, you were like, Cody was freaking out that Gallant pulled the goalie with like 2.5 minutes left in game 3. And the Panthers did it. The Panthers did it the other night. It worked for them. It's just like a common, you kind of got to read the situation. And I thought it was a good decision, but
yeah, but the Caps weren't in the Panthers zone for 7 straight minutes before pulling the goalie.
But either way, Arthur, I just wanted to ask you, like, I mean, is the hate, or not hate, but is the blame that's being put on Igor and Gallant justified? I mean, it's Igor's first real playoff series, and it's Gallant's first year with this team. Like, he doesn't know them yet that well in order to, see what they need to do best in order to succeed in the playoffs. Like, he's figuring it out also as he goes.
Yeah, I mean, fans are the best. The reason that we have people watching this, that I had a job for all the years that I've had it. So I'm never going to tell any fans to not, calm down. Don't be upset. I think that's crazy when writers do stuff like that, because we wouldn't be here if they weren't so insane and intense about it. It's great.
It's a great idea to start Kincaid in game 5.
But I think at this, people just kind of lash out. They're venting their frustration. It's been a very frustrating playoff run. No one could have possibly seen coming what happened in Pittsburgh. No one. And if somebody says like, oh, I knew the Penguins, like, that's nonsense. There's no way.
Everyone picked the Rangers to win the series. I feel like every single person that covers hockey.
Even anybody who picked the Penguins picked it to be a long series. Nobody thought that they would run them over like this. Like, Sid can be as great as he can be, and he has been great, but Malkin has barely hurt them. He scored the triple overtime goal, but has he done anything else? Gensel, yeah, that one line has been really good, but could anybody have seen Evan Rodriguez killing them in game 3, or Jeff Carter, who's 37 years old? The frustration.
I called Jeff Carter as their X factor a few weeks ago. I said Jeff Carter's their one guy who's going to be their X factor.
And he was, last year when the Islanders played them, he was their best forward by a long way, because you have to pick your poison with the Penguins. If you're going to shut down Crosby's line or shut down Malkin's line, obviously they have a third line, and Carter's a big game player. So, but this is not a series where you can blame Ranger fans for buying into the hype or believing me with my terrible predictions, or any dozens of other pundits or people in the game. Everybody I talk to, I did a piece that I do every playoffs, where I talk to people I know in the game, a couple assistant coaches, a couple of scouts, a couple of assistant GMs, and nobody picked the Penguins. They all thought it was going to be a rout for the Rangers. So this is, I'm not going to fault any Ranger fan for feeling incredibly frustrated by this, because on paper, everybody saw this as a completely lopsided matchup. And I think, if we're talking right now and there's people watching this and it's over, and it was over in 5 games, I'll probably have written something that says this is a huge failure. It doesn't matter. The expectations were low. It doesn't matter that this is still a young team. This was a beatable Penguins team. So people can vent all they want. I think it's totally justified. This is not the Rangers sneaking into the playoffs and playing Tampa at their best, or playing Carolina at their best, or like in the Western Conference where Nashville snuck in without their goalie and played, and it was total mismatch. This is a winnable series, and it doesn't matter. Throw all the rest of the stuff out the window about their inexperience, this or that. This is a series the Rangers needed to win, and should be winning. Even if they're still alive, they should be winning. I think that's it's certainly in the fans' heads. I have to believe it's in their heads a little bit too, that they got a little fat and happy, thinking like, oh, okay, it's third string goalie. We just need to put a few pucks on him. And the Penguins are defending like crazy, the way the Rangers should be defending like crazy, even though they have their Vezina winning goalie in net, because if you don't defend that way in the playoffs, it just snowballs on you. So, I think the frustration is definitely palpable. I sense it from Ranger fans. Certainly, we get up to like 200-300 comments on each of my stories that post on The Athletic. And there's a lot of finger pointing going around in those comments. And I totally get it. It's really, really, really surprising that they fell into the hole that they fell into.
I completely agree. And it's funny because you mentioned, it's not Tampa, and that's kind of my mentality too, which is why I have like the slightest sliver of hope that this series still is winnable if you just take it, game at a time mentality. But you had mentioned one thing the Rangers can take away. And one thing I think they could really take away from this is, and you mentioned it, is really just to gain the experience and grow as a team. I think one thing that we can all agree is always consistent, is, to learn how to be a winner is having that winner's mentality, but you need to understand that feeling of losing first. And, I'm not an NBA guy at all. Johnny knows, but
I love the NBA.
Yeah. But I mean, LeBron lost for years before he won his first championship. I think he was like 26 years old. So, he lost a heck of a lot before he grew into that winner's mentality. But the thing I feel like he stayed consistent with is you could always tell, and still to this day, that he's incredibly hungry. And the Rangers just need to learn from this type of experience. And it seems like they've gotten away from that hunger in games 3 and 4, where they really showed that they were hungry in 1 and 2, even though they lost game 1. I thought it was a coin flip. It was a coin flip. And I think, if they want to win this series, they really, or unless the series is over, of course, but they need to kind of find that hunger and move from there. But yeah, that's my rant.
I can't believe you just pulled out a LeBron comment.
You like that?
He joined Chris. He joined Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh.
That helped too.
The one.
But I think the other thing to remember too, and when you're looking at part of the reason, Patrick Nemeth has been bad. He's not the main reason they were down 3-1.
Right.
Some of the failures are the guys that you expected to, that have been in the playoffs before, whether it's Mika Zibanejad, who I don't think has been as bad as people make it out to be. He's definitely lost a lot of faceoffs and lost some ice to Crosby. But, I think he probably had about 10 grade A scoring chances that didn't go in the first 3 games. So, but I think about guys like Panarin and guys like Kreider, who I don't think have really stepped forward. Kreider in particular, to me, has been a bit of a surprise given the season that he's had and the maturity that he seems to show now 10 years in, that he's a leader on this team and he's the longest tenured guy. And I would have thought that he would have really been one of the hungrier guys. And it seems like he's been a little too easily pushed out of the fight at least in the first 4 games. We don't know what happened in game 5, but I think in the salary cap world, and particularly in the cap mess that the Rangers are about to go into in the offseason, whenever that comes, every playoff series, no matter what the expectations are, no matter what the matchup is, every playoff series is a referendum for every guy on the roster. Because whether you're Patrick Nemeth and you're debating whether you're going to buy him out or trade him, I mean, his fate seems to be sealed if you're a practical thinking person, that he's not a good fit on a team that's got 6 good defensemen.
His exit meeting won't be pretty.
No, but if you're going Cop versus Strome, like every game there's some sort of evaluation on one of these 2 guys, because you'd probably, unless 8 other things happen, you're not keeping them both. Panarin obviously seems pretty immovable. Kreider's pretty immovable, but you'd be surprised at how many other guys might draw some interest if you suddenly sour on them a little bit, or if you decide, like Philip Hedl, I think is a guy who needed to have a big series, and he's been okay. I think his line mates have been a lot better than he has, but he's a guy going into the last year of his deal, still a young guy, still kind of a conundrum. Nobody can figure out why this guy is still a 20-point player with all the skills that he has. So I feel like that's where, whether you're a 24-year-old guy who's never been in the playoffs, or you're a 30-year-old guy who's coming to the end of your contract, or a 28-year-old guy who's got 7 years left, you got to look in the mirror, because every offseason in the salary cap world, things change. And you just need to look at some of these other teams. I think when we get through the first round, you're going to see some teams do what the Islanders did. They're just going to surprise people by firing a coach or making a big trade as we get towards the draft, to change things up, because you only have a limited amount of space to just go to July, whatever it is, 13th this year, and say, we'll buy a couple new guys. Like, those days are over. You gotta make sure you make your decisions and make them in a strong way. So all these games matter. And I feel like that, to me, is another thing you put in the disappointment column, is that there are guys who should be understanding that nothing is assured with this team, even though they've helped kind of dig out from 5 pretty lousy years. And they can all say they were a part of a team that was almost one of the best regular season teams in franchise history, and guys hit some incredible milestones. But you lose a hard fought 7-game series, that's one thing, but you fall behind and you trip over yourselves the way that they did in 2 straight. That's a look in the mirror time. And I think Chris Drury is probably not a GM who's afraid to say that to certain guys when the season is over in those exit meetings, that, like, we expected a lot from you, whoever that veteran is or whoever that young guy is. And we have a lot of decisions to make now. So nothing is assured.
$8.5 million contract. Cough, cough.
Are you cool with one more question each, Arthur? I know we're kind of
sure
going long here. Do you want to go first, Cody? Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Be careful how you answer this, because this is strictly for my Twitter following. I love, stirring the pot a little bit with, Devils fans, Islanders fans, Ranger fans. But, as it is right now, I feel like this is the first time in my lifetime where all 3 teams are kind of on the same level playing field, right? Like the Islanders fire Barry Trotz, and all of a sudden they don't seem as, picked to win the Stanley Cup. This year, a lot of people predict them to win the Cup. And, next year, the Devils are going to have the 2nd overall pick, and they're going to have a young upcoming team with a lot of offensive talent. They just need a goalie, and they could be a playoff team possibly in the next, year or two. And then the Rangers now, sure, they're a playoff team, but are they really a legit playoff team yet? That is unknown. So, next season, I feel like is the first time where all 3 teams maybe have a chance to make some noise, in the same kind of point range, whatever that may be. But which franchise do you think out of the Rangers, Islanders, Devils do you think wins the Stanley Cup first?
Oh, man.
That was a long way to ask that question. I'm sorry about that.
No, I understand. I'd say the Rangers are closest just because they have the best goalie. It feels like you have that base in net and the young guys on D that I described. The Islanders window is pretty tight right now. They have Igor's best buddy in the NHL and Ilya Sorokin, and he's, if Shesterkin is 100 on the EA, NHL rankings, Sorokin's about a 97. Like, these guys are neck and neck, and I think it's awesome that 2 guys who basically grew up together in the Russian system and were battling in the 2 rivalry teams in the KHL are now doing it again in the NHL. It's a tough story to write, because the way the world is now and the way that, the NHL has been in terms of access and things like that the last couple of years. But it's pretty neat that they're going to be there kind of anchoring those 2 teams for a long time. So the Islanders do have a good young goalie. They have some good young pieces, but I just think, whatever is to come for them, they need to hit the accelerator. And I'm not sure that they can do it, given, again, some cap constraints and some decisions they have to make. And the Devils, to me, they have some really good young pieces, but they kind of remind me of the Oilers when McDavid, when they were kind of cycling through their number 1 picks and just sort of fumbling around every other aspect of their organization. The Devils just seem really dysfunctional to me. They do have some incredible talent, and if they can go out and get a goalie, I wouldn't be surprised if it's Alexander Georgiev next year. He seems like a guy who could, a guy who needs to prove himself. The rest of that program needs to prove itself from top to bottom. So that would be kind of fun if it's Georgiev there, and he's a guy who can hold a grudge pretty well. He's a pretty intense guy, and I think he's felt a little bit bitter about his place in the Rangers hierarchy for the last couple of years. So if he goes to one of their local rivals, that would be pretty fun to see. Maybe it wouldn't be fun if he stands out, but I just feel like of the 3 teams, the Rangers, not just because of the season they've had, but I think that, they have higher end skill, and I think the other 2 teams, they have a better base of young guys than the other 2 teams, and they have the best goalie among the 3 teams. So to me, that puts them a little bit ahead. But yeah, like I said, a lot can change. If the Rangers get off to a slow start next year and they're below the cut line when you get to November, all bets are off. I mean, everybody saw what happened to the Islanders, and obviously there were some extenuating circumstances with their building not being ready, the long road trip. They played through COVID, but when you fall behind by 6 or 8 points by Thanksgiving, it's nearly impossible to get back into it, especially that, in the East now, where the top 8 teams were all so good all year long. So, I think those first couple months next season are going to be really crucial for the Rangers to keep the momentum going from what they did, regardless of what they do this offseason. So, it's a good question, and I would love to see it. All the years that I cover the Islanders, I was hoping for an Islander Ranger series because I think young guys like yourselves and fans of a certain age just have, it's been 20 years. You haven't seen it in so long.
Right.
And it really is the thing that cements a rivalry, is to be able to play a playoff series. The buildings when both teams have been good, through a couple stretches of the Rangers run from 2012 to 17, when the Islanders had some good runs and made the playoffs a few times. There were a couple near misses, and I feel like the rivalries kind of went a little bit to the side. Islanders and Penguins played a lot. Rangers and Penguins played a lot. They both played the Capitals a few times, but never each other. And it feels like there's certain fans that kind of feel like the Penguins are the team they hate the most. And it's just like, should always be the Islanders if you're a Ranger fan, and the playoffs really the thing that makes that the most fun.
I've always wanted that to happen, but now that we have Igor versus Ilya Sorokin, I don't want it to happen, because if God forbid the Islanders win, we're never going to hear the end of it. Because there's already people saying now, like, I had people tweeting at me last night, like, if the Rangers had Sorokin, I bet they'd be up 3-1.
Yeah. Yeah. And also I agree with you, Arthur, because we do have Alexis Lafreniere and Keandre Miller, and those guys can still turn into superstars. I mean, you don't really know quite what you have with either of them yet, and I think they're going to continue to get better and better. But all right, I think my last question is going to be, I'm going to switch it up a little bit. So Brennan Othmann is a guy I look at who really has all the makings of a star. I assume they're really going to take their time with him, based on how we've seen some of our top end young forwards develop a little slower than we'd ultimately like them to in the past. So when do you think will be the right time for him to get a real crack at our roster? And is next season a possibility?
I'm sure it is a possibility. I think you get the number of essentially lottery tickets they have with some of these prospects. And I think, among NHL teams, I don't know that there's a franchise that's had a better season for the bulk of their prospects than the Rangers have. It's Othmann, it's Ryder Korczak, who's maybe not as high end a prospect. It's Will Cooley, who I think is a guy. I think is a guy that you could plug right into that a third or fourth line winger role, and maybe he's a guy that's, just because of the roles, is a little bit ahead of Othmann. If Othmann projects more as a top six guy, obviously that's going to be a harder spot to crack, just because the Rangers are so loaded up top. Brett Berard is a guy, I don't know if he's going to come out of college, but is a guy that I think is on the radar too. And obviously in net, you've got Dylan Garand, who's maybe, one of the one or two best goalies in Canadian juniors right
if
now.
he ever comes back.
Kravtsov, sure. I don't know if the ship has sailed on that one, but
I think it's sailed. I think it's sailed. I think it's docked in a different country.
If it's sailed, at least there's a chance to get something back for him. So, because you're going to have to give up some assets, maybe, if you want to unload Nemeth, so you want to be able to bring back some assets. So it's all, that chess game is going to happen soon enough. But I think as far as Othmann goes, if he starts in Hartford, it's not the worst thing in the world. He's going to get his chance, I'm sure. Maybe not next season, but yeah, it's, I think if you're looking at this team through the last few years, and if there's any sort of failing that they've had, it's have they rushed some of their young guys? Maybe the Kravtsov situation doesn't happen if he stays in Russia a little bit longer, and they're not so eager to have him over here and playing in the minors and all of the stuff that happened after that. Lias Andersson, similar situation. So I think patience is going to be important with these guys,
Right.
and when you have a big club that's going well and producing and performing well, I think younger players can accept a little bit more that there is a waiting period. You're not just going to jump the front of the line. And I think, getting back to what Johnny was saying about the Devils, there's no structure in that organization. They have some good guys in Utica. Utica's a good, a really good AHL team, but have some of their guys really progressed that went straight to the NHL? Are they doing things to make that franchise better? Like, no, it hasn't happened yet. Even as guy as talented as Jack Hughes just hasn't. He doesn't move the needle as far as them being a better team. So
Right.
I think Othmann, he's there's a lot of people in the organization that are super excited about him and what he has to offer, and it's incredibly important to get guys in on their entry-level deals, especially with a couple of years to go on their entry-level deals, and have them be regulars, because you need the flexibility. I think, to my mind, and things can change obviously with training camp, but to my mind, Cooley is that guy that's going to supplant a veteran and give them a chance to move some bodies out, or at least not have to feel like they got to go out and sign somebody to fill a role beyond some of their big ticket guys. But they do have a pretty deep bench, and that excitement level is pretty high. And also you've got some chips to work with. If you feel like you need to, there's something that's missing. If you weren't able to sign, if they didn't dump Patrick Nemeth, or they did dump Patrick Nemeth and there was nobody that they signed to replace him, you have a few prospects now to move around. And a guy like Garand, Igor Shesterkin seems like he's going to be the guy for a long time. So Garand is a really nice trade chip to have for a franchise that might be looking for a good young goalie. So this even if you don't see any of these guys in the lineup on opening night next October, just the fact that you have all these guys is a huge benefit to the organization.
Yeah, and Cooley really interests me because he was a guy. He had over 40 goals, right? He was something like that, and it's interesting because the Rangers look at him as a top 9 guy or bottom 6 guy, and it's like it's going to be an interesting take on it because he's a guy who might come in there on the third line and might end up being a third line scorer, and we haven't really seen that. So it should be interesting to play out, and yeah, those are some good points. What are you smiling at, Johnny?
Can Cooley play six defenseman lefty?
He is a lefty. That is important.
Swap some we'll Brendan Smith him.
Yeah. But I think we do got to finish though with the time capsule question. We'll see how well this ages. What's your game 5 prediction?
I think they win. I think you're going to be reminded that this is not the 2017 Penguins. They're still playing a third string goalie who's in his 30s and has been in the AHL a long time. You got to just be able to
test him,
to overcome that and be, play downhill, stop with the East-West stuff. I think they know that they can do it. And really, there have been stretches, even in the middle of those 2 incredibly awful games in Pittsburgh, there were long stretches where the Rangers controlled play. The first 10 minutes of the first period, they were dominating. And when they got that goal, that was not a great goal that Domingue gave up, that Lafreniere scored. They could have very easily made it 2-0. Nemeth takes the bad penalty that kind of stunted them. And then in game, arguably in game 3, even at 4-1, I was thinking they're not playing this bad. There's just, they're farting around on their own end, and there's been a couple mistakes. Igor hasn't been good. They put Georgiev in. He was fantastic, I thought, in that game, and they totally dominated in the second period. And then 2 power plays early in the third. Domingue did make some good saves. Yeah. But if they score on one of those power plays, it could be 8 or 9-4 Rangers in that game, legitimately. So I think they just, the crowd will have been rocking, I'm sure. And so I feel like there's going to be a game 6, and after that, like you said, who knows? You score 5 or 6 on this guy and remind yourself like, oh, okay, there's a reason that we were a team that was favored.
Our big guys just got to score, I think, is what it comes down to.
Anybody, take anybody.
Yeah, we will take anybody. That's right. But Arthur, thank you so much. This was awesome.
I hate to be that guy. I just want to ask one more follow-up.
Here we go. Know. Oh my God.
Well, if there is game 6, if you're a Penguins guy, do you start Jari or not?
Yeah, I think whenever he's ready, you put him in there. That's been their guy. It's the same reason that after game 4, Gallant didn't hesitate to say Igor's our guy. You have your guy, your number 1 guy. That's who you're most comfortable with all season long. You go with him.
I promise that's the last question.
All right, Arthur, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys. Really fun. Appreciate it.